Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Writers' Corner live show for this week. On the show, we connect authors to each other and to their readers. Readers are able to find and explore new authors to love. You will meet both seasoned as well as aspiring authors on the show. We invite you today to hear the backstory of our featured author, none other than Bonnie MacBird, author of the highly acclaimed book, The Devil's Due. So don't go away. We will be right back. And welcome to the Writers' Corner live show. If you're just joining us, welcome to the show. Welcome to all our viewers on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Periscope, on Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm your host, Brijetti Limbanda. I'm a live video camera confidence coach, and I host and produce live video shows that help brands, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and of course, authors share their stories. I also want to let you know that I am a responsible social media advocate. My amazing co host is Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She is the award winning author of the children's Poolicious book series. She's also working on a movie screenplay at the moment, and we are looking forward to the release of her third book. Mary is a wife and mom to three beautiful inspirations, and she's also a special needs and disabilities advocate. Mary, welcome to the show. It's episode 68.
Oh my word. I'm so excited. We are just rocking and rolling. We're just kind of booking it all the way out to like March at this point, February, March. So we're just, it's so exciting. All these authors, publishers, writers, and even illustrators that we get to meet and hear their story and share their books. It's just so exciting. And I am Thornton Klein, who we know and is a co-writer with me. We just signed a contract last week with my daughter because she's going to be doing our graphic novel. She can do all the illustrations for our middle grade readers. So super excited about that. It'll come out sometime next year. And now I am an ambassador for where I live for special needs and disabilities. So I'm super excited about that and being an advocate for information,
That is absolutely wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So our author for today is Bonnie MacBird, and she was born and raised in San Francisco. And she fell in love with Sherlock Holmes by reading the canon at age 10. So she was a young reader. And she says her long Hollywood career includes feature film development executive at Universal, the original screenplay of the movie TRON. Imagine that. Wow.
I know. So excited.
She's also won 3 Emmy Awards for documentary writing and producing. She has produced numerous plays and musicals and theatre credits as an actor and director. And she lives in Los Angeles and London. And we're going to talk a bit about her book today, The Devil's Due. And some of the amazing reviews we've had about the book is that it's another worthy tale of Holmes and Watson's adventures, an extraordinary mystery. Someone else describes it as gorgeously crafted and marvelously entertaining, and says that she writes with grit and spark, and her wit and intelligence and passion infuse every action-packed page. Shall we invite Bonnie to the show?
Yes, because we're thrilled, aren't we now? Those are
right?
Great expressive words to describe her writing. How exciting for somebody to read what you write and feel that way about what you put on paper is just such an honor.
I know, it's amazing. Come on, let's invite Bonnie to the show.
Hi.
You like your intro?
That was lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, we're so excited you're
Welcome to
here.
the show, Bonnie. You
Thank you.
say that you were a reader at a young age, but what was it that inspired you to want to become a writer, and why Sherlock Holmes?
Well, because I was a reader, I just fell in love with stories, and my mother would take me to the library every week, and I would get the maximum number of books. And I think when you read as a young kid, you become immersed in the world of story. And I also, from a childhood, I would make up stories. Particularly, I would love, I'd fall in love with characters. I read all the Oz books. I read the Thornton Burgess books. But I also read a lot of kind of 19th century, what they would call boys' adventure books, and Conan Doyle would fall into that category. At least this is way back. I'm not going to give how old I am. Way back, they were categorized, and so I just read widely, and I got just very excited. I love Sherlock Holmes. I think because even as a child, I related to his being kind of an outsider. I loved how smart he was and how he would figure out things way ahead of everybody. And then the quality of the friendship, just shines through those pages. Holmes and Watson are just possibly the best friendship in literature. So a whole bunch of things appealed to me as a kid and now.
That's awesome. So would you consider that yourself as an introvert as a child, or were you very outgoing but just loved to read? Because a lot of times introverts, I think, maybe tend to be more avid readers, but then that's not necessarily the truth. So
I actually, if you do the Myers-Briggs things,
yeah,
I'm actually an extrovert,
okay,
and which is very difficult to be a writer and an extrovert, because writing demands a ton of time alone and quiet. But like I'm with all the characters and we're all talking. So I'm definitely an extrovert, but yet I was just a massively avid reader as a child. So,
but look what it did. So that promotion of literacy, and that those of us trying to urge young children to start reading and learning to read early, or just love books, even if a child can't read. I mean, I know as a mother, I started when my little guy could barely even sit up, just showing him the pictures, and it would calm him down. But he loves books.
Did you read to him?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
And we actually were reading a funny Halloween story last night and making it very goofy, but
that's fun. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful bonding experience for parents and children, but also children learn to read. My mother read to me, from the time I was an infant, really. And according to her, I could read by age 3. And so,
I'm not surprised.
Simple thing. Because she spent so much time with me, and we as tiny children, we emulate whatever our parents are doing, and it's a vital interest to us. So I mean, that's a key time, I think, and I think it's wonderful that you spend time reading with your child.
Yeah, and I've done that with all 3. And then in the writing, for me, writing children's stuff, I try to come from the viewpoint of a child, not an adult, because who wants to read an adult writing a child's book, right? That would be boring.
And children are not stupid. They're not stupid at all. They're developmentally different than we are, but they're not stupid, and that's the challenge, I think.
It is very challenging.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, but they also like a lot of fun and silly words and goofiness, and they learn so much through play. So that's very important. I think it sticks more than somebody hounding something into a child.
As you said that, another thing came to me about Sherlock Holmes, and that is that the original books, and hopefully mine as well, are really funny. There are laugh aloud moments in there. Now they're subtle, but they're really quite funny. And I think humor goes a long way for all ages to keep the engagement there, especially when you're presenting big ideas or scary ideas. If you can also laugh, these things are more palatable, especially for kids. So I think humor is huge.
Absolutely.
Where do you draw your inspiration from, other than Sherlock Holmes? I mean, for the ideas for your own stories. Where does your inspiration come from, and is there a specific time of the day you find that you're more inclined to sort of, the words just flow for you, or are there certain periods? How do you put it all together?
Well, I'm going to answer the second question first, which is I'm a morning person, so I always write first thing in the morning and try to get my word count quota. But sometimes I will get a second wind late at night and do another batch. But in terms of getting inspiration, the shower is always a good place. But actually, I get a lot from going to the library. I often will start, with internet searches, and I do get quite a bit there. But I go to the library, and sometimes, is that am I still on? I just got something
Yes, yeah.
go across my screen. And so I'll go to the library. And so, for example, on this last book, The Devil's Due, I wanted a really creative way to kill an opera singer that was not immediately apparent to everyone, but Holmes figures it out. And I went to the Wellcome Library in London, which is a medical library. And I knew I was looking for, I didn't know what it would be, but I was looking for that thing. And in my reading there, I discovered something called the ammonia phone, which was a quack medical device of the time.
Oh.
And what it was a little tube that looks kind of like a recorder, and you would breathe into it, and inside it were chemicals, and they were imitating the chemical composition of Italian air, because they thought all the good singers came from Italy. So if it must be the air. So ammonia and these other things to imitate the air. And this is totally quack. But they sold like hotcakes. Anyway, so this opera singer had this, and that was the delivery mechanism for the poison. And I thought, nobody's done that.
Right, yeah. And you got to do that. You got to keep doing those things that nobody else has done. And I want to ask you, like what you're talking about, what is your word count for the morning? I'm very curious, and I'm sure other authors are. I know we just had an author pipe on from your book, my book, to say hi. And so I'm curious, what is your word count, like your goal? Like people have steps, like 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah. I find 1,500 is a good goal, and I can reliably hit that. And if I can do more, great. If I'm on a tight deadline, I sometimes have to do more. Sometimes I'll have to do it in 2 sessions. But I mean, word count is one thing, because word count goes, I said that about my sessions, but word count really only pertains to first drafts, because you barrel through this thing and you get the draft done. And then that's just the beginning,
Right.
so there's way more to this process.
Sure.
And so sometimes the research will come ahead of this. Sometimes it'll come during it as inspiration. Sometimes it'll come after, to lock in the details, particularly of places. So as an example of that would be in my first book, Art in the Blood. Holmes and Watson go to Paris, and there's a kind of run. They run from the Chat Noir, the nightclub, the Chat Noir, to where Toulouse-Lautrec lives. And I actually knew where he lived at that exact date.
Wow.
And I knew where the Chat Noir was, and I walked that path so I could describe, goes up a hill and by a cemetery, so in other words, so some of the research is on the ground, some of the research is in books and online, but so going back to the word count question, so those days there's no word count, I'm doing something else, I'm doing research. So it basically varies, and it also depends on my deadline.
Yes, absolutely. And I know something, go ahead, Brigetti.
I wanted to ask you, Bonnie, how is The Devil's Due different from the other 2 books? Is there something special about The Devil's Due that's different?
There are some similarities and some differences. The first book takes place in Paris, London, and in the north of England in Lancashire. Second book takes place in London, south of France, Montpellier and Nice, and then it goes up to Scotland and the Highlands where the main action takes place. The third book is different in that I just decided to keep them all the time in London, and I just thought I would mine London for the most interesting, weird things I could find that maybe we haven't seen so much before. And London is full of that stuff. And my living there, is very inspiring to me. I live actually right off Baker Street. I can see the Baker Street Tube from my window. And
Wow.
anyway, so I just began to really look around me and say, what is weird and interesting here that we haven't seen? So that's probably the most different thing. I also wrote the books in sequential years. So the first one, Art in the Blood, is in 1888. And the second one is in 1889. The third one is in 1890. And the boys are young. They're in their 30s, Holmes and Watson. So I envision them as quite handsome characters and very, vibrant. And, Watson has a thing for the ladies. So he's always amusing. But so that's the difference, I think. But you don't have to read them in order, even though they're chronologically in order. You don't have to read them in order. And so they stand alone.
Now, your books are also translated into 17 languages worldwide. That is phenomenal. How did that happen?
Well, that's entirely the publisher's doing. I was like, I don't know how that happened. I mean, they sell it to different markets, and Sherlock Holmes is known everywhere, in every corner of the world. I mean, even in the most remote villages, people can see the deer stalker and the magnifying glass, and they know it's Sherlock Holmes. It's just crazy how that character has penetrated the world consciousness, and he's loved, universally loved. I think he's arguably the most famous fictional character of all time.
That's fun. And so I'm going to ask you a question that I know Bridgetti wants to know. So it is, anybody or anything in your book come from your real life? Do you have characters in your own life hidden that only they know about?
Well, I do have each year after Art in the Blood, there's a group called the Baker Street Irregulars, and that is an invitation-only group of Sherlockians who are like intense Sherlockians. And I am a member, and they have an auction raising funds, and I auctioned off naming rights so the last two books had characters that were named somebody but they weren't really based on these people, so I'm not sure that counts. But I think when anybody who writes fiction, you must find this when you're writing your children's books, that you always draw on people and you can't help but put yourself in it, because you can't help but doing that as an author. You have that's what you're drawing on. You are you. So but I am trying to stay really close and accurate to the style of Conan Doyle. So I hope not to be altering the characters of Holmes and Watson at all. The stories are told through Watson. You're seeing through his eyes, his voice, and he's a wonderfully decent, lovely man to inhabit as a thinker and as a viewer of the action. He's a lot of fun, actually. So. But don't you find as a writer, you are in your books, you can't help it?
No, you can't. There's no way. And I know this happens for you, and it probably happens for other authors and writers. Day-to-day experience, that's a book. Right. That's a section. That's a story, and that happens all the time. Or I really want to use this, and I think we have things that happen in our own lives that could be very powerful in a story, and sometimes we overlook that because it is so near and dear to our heart. But I think those are good to put in stories, even if you're using other characters and change the names.
Yes, I find I use thematic content that way too. I mean, things that are important to me, I want to put in the books. And you can't, when you talk about genre fiction, mysteries or horror or whatever, or comedy or whatever, genre fiction as opposed to literary fiction, people don't really think of them in terms of great thematic content. They just think, oh, is this a good case? Is this a good adventure? But I feel like once you expand Sherlock Holmes into novel length, you need to deliver a little more meat thematically. And yet you don't want to weigh down the rollicking adventure aspect of it and all the brilliant deductions. There's all this stuff you have to deliver. But I think thematically, and that's where it gets more personal. So my first book, Art in the Blood, was about sort of the peril, the underlying texture of that was about the perils and the gifts of the artistic temperament. Because artists can see things that other people can't see. They're acutely sensitive, and that allows them to do their work. And Holmes is definitely an artist, and that's made very clear in the original stories by Conan Doyle. He's an artist at what he does. He's, you know, we hear all about the scientific method. We hear that all the time about him, but also an artist. I'm married to a scientist, and I think that is, and he's also an artist and a musician. His avocations, and he also talks about science in a way that's very artistic. So looking at that in terms of the perils and the gifts, you know, Holmes is extremely gifted. He's a genius, but he is also vulnerable, which also makes a wonderful, you know, complex character. He has the drug problem. He has issues. He gets depressed. I think he's described in the original stories as what we would call bipolar or manic depressive. So, I mean, he has his challenges, and that it's interesting because that particular I don't know, condition, I wouldn't call it an illness exactly, but that particular mentality, whatever, is very connected statistically to our artistry. You know, there's been some wonderful books on this. So, you know, I think that's that subtext is there because that's important and interesting to me. I come from a family of artists. I'm married to an artist scientist, and I'm an artist also. I paint. So you know, that grabbed me as a theme. And I'm sure, I think especially for children's books, I notice people, you know, have something to say with what they're doing. And they want to entertain, but they want to say something with it at the same time.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you about, you know, with your husband, he's got a perfect balance there, art and science. So he's using both sides of his brain. And there is art, actually, you know, art is everywhere. And so he sounds like a very interesting person. And because he's a scientist, he probably can give you ideas for some wacky science stuff in your books.
The current book I'm working on now, which is book 4 in the series, is called The Three Locks. And part of it takes place in Cambridge University. And so I'm talking to him about some of the interesting mathematical and other advances that happened there at that time. So yes, he does. Although he's also, I don't involve him until the end. He's a very tough critic. And that's another thing I do. I stage my critical help from people. So I have a writers group that meets weekly, and we're all professional. We've all been published, and we, you know, crit the ongoing, you know, first draft pages. And then I have a couple of other professional editors who at later stages I have go through it and give me tough love. And Alan, my husband, is the last person to read it. So I give it to the publisher. He's very tough, but I want it to be like as pristine and perfect as I can get it. Yeah, and he's a good reader for that.
That is awesome. And you know, you really have to have that feedback. It's like in anything that we do, because we can't think of everything.
No, we can't. And there'll be typos. There's still typos in the thing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's maddening.
It is at a certain point you can't see them in your own work. You can't miss that you put he. You know, you can't miss. I mean, you can't see it anymore. You know, there's no perfection in art, so you just have to live with that.
What is your favorite word, Bonnie, that you kind of, you know, if you had to read through your work, what is the favorite word that you often use and you think, you know, somebody says to you, Bonnie, you got to stop using that word. You know, do you have something like that?
Oh, gee. I think I sometimes know he continued to something, and one of my editors says, "Stop continuing to do something, just do it." That was a recent note I got. I don't know. I hope not to overuse any subtleties or I don't know. I mean, I try to avoid cliches. You know, I'm emulating another person's style. That's another thing. And so one of the things I do is while I'm writing as I start the morning I read a little Conan Doyle. I don't read any other Sherlockian pastiche because I don't want a diluted form of his writing to come to. I just want to read the originals. So, and Conan Doyle, you know, in the first book, the first time I sat down to do this, I I consciously thought, what about him is genius? Because he is a genius. I think he's a vastly underrated writer. I think he's one of the greats. And what about his work? And it makes it hubris, of course, to imitate him. But on the other hand, if you look at all artists, that's how artists get good, is by emulating the masters. And all of the masters have done that. Anyway, so I'm not putting myself in that category, but nevertheless, I tried to isolate what is it about Conan Doyle that is so incredibly, genius, and why are we loving his character 130 years later? So there's a lot of things that he does that are kind of subtle, and that I tried to say, how can I learn to do this? He's a master storyteller, and he has something that in screenwriting is called narrative drive. It's that thing that makes you want to turn the page. And there's this sort of muscle, this energy underneath his storytelling that is missing, I think, from a lot of present day versions of this stuff. And it's hard to write. It's hard to infuse narrative drive. I mean, there are some tricks, but that's kind of one of the things I really tried to emulate and have felt challenged and enjoy trying to do. He's also got great character writing. He loved Dickens. And of course, Dickens is the master of crazy, colorful, interesting, even the tiny characters are interesting. And so I try to make sure that all the clients, but also all the subsidiary characters that walk across the stage are interesting and of the time and so forth. So that, and then of course the interplay between Holmes and Watson, the humor, the subtle humor is important to get right. But also Conan Doyle has, through the voice of Watson, created a man of such incredible honor and decency that you feel comfortable and happy being in his shoes as the reader or as the writer. And it's such a tonic for today's messy world. And because Holmes and Watson know what's right, and they are able in the course of the story to set out what's right. Now, my screen just changed, and now I can only see me and I can't see you. I'm not sure what happened.
We can see you.
Yes.
Okay.
You are center stage.
Okay. But I no longer, suddenly I can no longer see the two of you. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, she just changed the screen so that you can see the book better. So now a question about movies. Is there any talk about any of the books being turned into a major motion picture or TV or anything?
There's always talk.
Okay.
In fact, I had a meeting yesterday about this. So, I mean, I was in the film business for 30 years, and talk is cheap. That's all.
Right.
But they're perfectly structured to be movies. I was a movie writer, and I was a story editor at a studio. So, when I decided to try a long form Holmes, the novel structure is more like a movie structure, whereas Conan Doyle was writing short stories and novellas, and those have kind of like a Japanese bridge kind of structure. It's like beginning and the climax and the end, whereas a long form structure is more like a 3-act structure, and it's like a bridge with pylons. It needs more support. And that support comes from dramatic moments and moments of action and adventure. So I structure these more like movies, and so I think they're quite suitable.
I cannot believe, but we're out of time already.
Mm-hmm.
Bonnie, where can people connect with you on social media?
Well, I have a website, www.MacBird, my last name.com. I'm on Twitter at MacBird. And I also have a Facebook page for the series, for the Sherlock Holmes Adventure series by Bonnie MacBird. That's on Facebook. And I'd be delighted to hear from anyone.
Yes, we've had a lot of people piping in this morning, and I'm sure they would love. Maybe they'll be some of your new fans.
Oh, lovely! Well, I'd be delighted to meet them.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome. I know somebody on Twitch was dying to ask a question, and I was trying to signal to them that they could do that. So please reach out to Bonnie MacBird on either Facebook, on Twitter,
yes,
or on her website, macbird.com.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live today. This was awesome. Bonnie, thank you for being such a great guest, and we really enjoyed hearing a bit more about you.
Thank you.
Yes. And if you'll wait, we'll go to commercial, and then we can, if you want to hang out for a second afterwards, that'd be great.
Thanks, everyone, and goodbye from now.
Bye-bye.